Good afternoon, everybody. I am sitting here with one of the premier financial uh, personalities in our city. Been here a long time, doing business for a long time. A lot of people want to know about money. What's it do for you? Do you need a lot of it? How much do you need? Can you get away with just a little? Well, all those questions will be asked. How do you get money for business? How do you get money for equipment for business? A lot of questions, a lot of questions. Our guest this afternoon is Mr. Thomas Mohammed, who is with the company called American Financial Services, which you can find here in Montgomery, Alabama. I think that he can help you just about anywhere, but I'll let him answer all those questions. But before we talk to him about any of that, let's get to know who Thomas is. Good afternoon, Thomas. How you doing?
Pretty good. How you, Kevin?
I am doing fine. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, how you got started in this business, and how long you been in it.
Well, we'll start with how long I've been in it first. This coming January 15th will be 32 years. It's American Financial Services LLC, and I'm at 5295 Vaughn Road next to State Farm Insurance Agency. My practices are full-fledged accounting with specialty in tax preparation, also with mortgages. That's FHA, VA, conventional, you name it, we do it. Also, we have insurance, life, health, and disability, and some index annuities. So, but business, we do a lot of proposals and what have you. So it's a plethora of things that we do or have done over the past 31, 32 years. But as far as business, as you were saying earlier, most people think that, hey, anybody can go into business. Well, anybody can start a business, but not anybody could have a business or maintain that business. What happens most of the time, and you probably have seen and may have also been a victim of, where when most people go into business, in particular in the Black community with Black entrepreneurs, the Black entrepreneurs put all that they have into the business, aesthetically to make it look good, put every dime into beautifying the building and the equipment and what have you. However, shortly thereafter, within 3, 4, 5, 6 months, you normally see a for rent or for sale sign once again, because you put all your capital into it. So that's, in my personal opinion, that may be vanity. When I say it may be vanity, yes, you want your businesses to look good. However, with most other ethnic groups, when they go into business, they do not put every dime they have into opening a business. They put enough into the business to have it operational so that they could start making money to refill the coffers, so to speak, and then they have enough money to maintain and sustain the business. Whereas in our community, every dime goes into making the business look good. In the last 4, 5, 6 years, you can see up and down each and every boulevard in the city where we've had a lot of nice restaurants, a lot of nice, I guess what you call bar and grills and what have you, event centers and what have you. And many of them have gone out of business. Why have they gone out of business? They put all of their money into most of those establishments. The other thing is you do not own the real estate that you are occupying. So a lot of the times, every dime that we have go into the initial aspect of it. And to find capital is kind of difficult because it requires you being capable of getting that money. And most of us go into debt either from personally out of our own pocket, and or if we have to go to the bank and borrow, we go into debt because we have these lofty ideas about things. And there's nothing wrong with having a lofty idea, a lofty concept, but you also have to have a strategic plan in place in order to implement it. You just can't go off the cuff and say, hey, I know how to do the operational portion. It's the administrative side is where we fail. When I say administrative, I'm not only talking about payroll, I'm talking about taxation, I'm talking about licensing, etc. So many of the businesses, they fail because they have failed to plan properly.
Let me ask you something. Everybody wants to be their own boss. Everybody think they can run it. Give me a couple of things that one should consider before one decides to go into business for themselves.
First and foremost, you got to know your market. You got to know whether or not you are a need or is there a niche for what you're trying to do. That's the first and foremost thing. Just because you can do something, say for instance, you're a barber, you know how to cut, that does not mean that you can open your own business. You may have to work in someone else's salon or someone else's barbershop for a while until you ascertain the ability to do so. Or any other type of business. If you're a plumber, mechanic, and you don't have that experience, how are you going to go into the business and you just finished school, the vocational classes or what have you, you got your certification. However, you don't have the experience. So give yourself enough time and enough space to grow in the idea of what business is like. You can monitor what's going on in someone else's business by being an employee first. So you're getting experience, and you're also looking at it from an administrative side to see how well or not so well this person or this company is operating their business. So you know the do's and the don'ts, the pros and the cons, so you get an idea or a better idea of what would be best for your company or your business. And many times we conflate the two. You and I are not a business. We don't have any employees. At one time, I had 8 employees and 5 contracted people. Well, now we're self-employed, meaning that we have business license that says that we own our own business. But if you're not making payroll for someone else, you're self-employed. You created a job for yourself. Until you make payroll, you're not a business.
And you just brought about something that somebody educated me on some years ago, maybe you. Being self-employed, it's nothing to it like owning a business. And the way you own a business is that you have to have people working for you.
Yes.
If you don't have people working for you, you don't own a business, you're self-employed. Ego seems to be a problem in businesses. Everybody wants to the mayor, every time I talk to the mayor or any mayor, whether it's Prattville, Montgomery, Wetumpka, we talk about businesses and what the government can do. Ultimately, the government is not going to save your business. Would that be a correct statement?
Let's put it this way. The government takes credit for creating businesses, but the government doesn't take credit for businesses going out of business, do they? I think we've put the burden on businesses to do more, on government to do more for us than government should. And I don't think government has the right to be in the business, so to speak, except for creating the environment to where tax incentives or rebates or abatements or whatever is conducive for private business owners to operate in and out of. Well, the question is, if you're talking about big money, you're not going to make big money unless you have government involvement. You're not going to have big money unless you have government contracts. So it's, I guess, a partnership. It's a relationship. So it's quasi-government, so to speak, where private and public entities are, in concert with one another, except for the fact government cannot inure any of the assets from that business. But government plays a major role in corporations. We're not just talking about mom and pop stores. Mom and pop stores typically don't have government contracts. But when you get into the mid-sized business or corporations, whereas someone like what's coming to Montgomery Manor or something like that, a Hyundai or something like, of course, government has to be involved. And that's proprietary information that the government and that particular corporation or company has, that they dialogue with the city council, the county commissioners, state legislatures, and what have you. But the mayor plays the most important role because it's his city and he knows what he or she wants to give away, can give away, or shouldn't give away.
Sole or partnership or LLC? Tell me a little bit about each one of those categories of business and which one is more beneficial to a new guy and to a guy that's been doing this, what he's been doing for 30 years or so.
It depends on the business. It depends on what you want to do. What you're talking about is business structure.
Right.
Everybody's sole proprietorship if it's not set up as an LLC, S corp, or C corp. Well, the LLC is a legally protecting entity. And then if you want to have it as a pass-through entity where there is no taxation, you can elect to file a form 2553, I'm thinking, with the IRS. And that way you become a pass-through entity with a C corporation, an S corporation, or either a partnership, whereas you are issued a Schedule K1, depending on what percentage of ownership that you have in those particular structures. Whereas a Schedule C Corp, the C Corp is not necessarily a pass-through entity, but it can have double taxation if you do not zero it out at the end of its fiscal year.
Now, tell me, when I hear the word pass-through, red flags go up in my head.
It's a separate entity from you.
Okay.
And as opposed to you paying double taxation, so to speak, if you are just an LLC, which is a single member entity, then it goes on a Schedule C. Then that Schedule C is also taxed as it would be if you were sole proprietor. And if the government is after you for failure to do something, it can go after you then, as opposed to if you had multiple members in your LLC, that becomes a partnership. So each partner gets what's called a Schedule K1, indicating the percentage of ownership that that partner has. So it's a pass-through entity, and instead of it going on a Schedule C, if you're not actively involved in that, say for instance, you and I were in business together, and I'm not actively involved, my information would go on the Schedule E, whereas there is no what? Self-employment tax, that extra 15.3%.
Okay. Tell me what defines a business and what defines a hobby. Either or you can make money with, but you certainly are limited to how much money you make on a hobby. Tell me what's the difference in
You
those?
just answered your own question. But what typically happens is how often it's done and whether or not it requires licensing to do. And a hobby is something you typically do for fun, not for income. If it's being done for income to where you're making or being provided money for services, you have a business. So it's a very thin line. So you have to go to the RS's website and you can look that up, hobby versus business. But a lot of people get confused or try to pretend as if they don't know the difference. Oh, I was just doing this as a hobby, but you made $100,000. That's not a hobby. You made $50,000. That's not a hobby. That was your employment. You're trying to avoid taxes. That's tax evasion.
So if I'm making, like I've done recently, if I'm making $5,000 a year doing what I do part time, is that a hobby? Or is that a business?
My professional advice would be, even though I'm an accountant, I would tell you to contact the IRS and ask the IRS specifically. That way you can't go wrong. Because if the IRS gives you that information, the IRS is responsible. And therefore, if the IRS gives you the wrong information, you cannot be held liable.
Okay. One of the things that small businesses fail to do, and I've been doing it for years, is have business insurance. It is, I mean, they're like what's happening in California right now. I mean, so many people losing their businesses and they don't have insurance. How important is having insurance for your business?
It's as important as breathing. And I say that from this perspective. Typically, if you're in someone's shopping plaza, they're going to require that you have insurance. You know, when we first went into business with the dry cleaners, when I had the 3 dry cleaners, what took place is I found out that there's what's called double net and triple net, whereas you're paying property taxes and insurance on the property via the monthly rent. And then if there's common area maintenance, then CalCam, now you have triple net, right? So all of these fees are associated with that. That does not protect your business. Your business, when you say business insurance, you're talking about the insurance on your equipment and the insurance that you may have, which is called professional liability or omissions insurance. If something happens in the parking lot, that will indemnify or protect the owner of the complex from, you know, being sued. So you would only be sued, and then that insurance would cover that. So it's professional liability and business insurance for your equipment or your employees or have you. Those are separate insurances. That's not the hazard insurance that it comes like a homeowner's insurance. Is what I'm speaking of. That does not cover that. So you have to get that separately. With using the analogy where you're talking about what's going on in California, that's a great segue. Allstate, State Farm, Farmers, all of them have left California. All of them have left Florida, basically, right? It's as if they knew something was coming in 2022, 2023, when they all got out, right? So in 2024, we had Hurricane Elena and Milton in Florida, so they were gone. And now we have the brush fires or the wildfires in the West Coast, and they're gone. So every lender, if you have a loan on a home, requires that you have homeowners insurance, or the business, if you have a loan, it requires that you have insurance on that business. And the insurance has to be replacement cost, not market cost. The lender may require replacement cost, but some lenders will say as long as it covers the amount of the loan, some will, most won't. So my advice always would be to get the replacement cost. Sometimes, and in many cases with the overinflated values of properties today, whether it's commercial or private, residences, so to speak, the replacement cost on the insurance will put you above and beyond the debt ratios, which would be the debt to income ratio if you're trying to get a residential loan, and it would be above and beyond the debt servicing ratio if you're trying to get a commercial loan, because it's very costly. If the business that you're in or home that you're in, if your home when you bought it was $100,000, but the replacement cost today, just say you bought it 10 years ago at $100,000. Well, 10 years later, the replacement cost is $250,000. Well, the lender wants the amount of money that is owed to that lender, of course, but also you want your property replaced. So when you have replacement costs, the insurance cost is much greater. So when you go and apply to refinance and or to purchase, they want you to have replacement costs. And sometimes, in many cases in this environment, it stops the loan. So then you have to see what can be done as far as lowering the value, negotiating the price, and etc. in order to get the loan done. You have what's called HPML, high price mortgage lending, or what have you, and you often have other back end scenarios or ratios that you have to meet in order to get the loan to clear the close.
Let me ask some, and it's just my, I think small because I've been small business for a long time. Home-based businesses versus going out getting yourself a renting commercial building, which I think is the biggest ripoff in the history of mankind. But
It's a ripoff if you're not a property owner.
yeah, exactly.
If you're the property owner of that complex,
That's
then
true.
that's what you want.
You're making money. But with AI, with the computer world the way it is it really necessary to go in debt? Because when you sign a commercial lease,
You're obligated.
right, you're obligated, and that's part of your debt. Is it worth doing that? Most businesses, service oriented businesses, of course, you can do from home, right? You disagree?
No, I agree with you, but that's just not how it really is. And what I mean by that, your city government, your county government, or your state government may restrict that, saying that you can only have certain types of business at home.
Right.
And then you got your clientele. If you got IT business, computer repair and stuff like that, it may be okay to do from home as long as you got a separate entry
Right.
from your main entry. And then you can only have up to, I think, a maximum of 300 square feet, 400 square feet that you can utilize for that. So it's not going to be beneficial if you have, just like you got a salon or something. No.
Right.
Well,
right.
unless you're just the only person doing hair or something like that. And if it's permissible, because state boards may not, so you got to check with your licensing agencies to see if it's permissible, and it may or may not be. But to say a home-based business, if it's telemarketing, you can do it from home, certainly. But it depends. You wouldn't want to be a mechanic and you live next door and they got 10 cars in the yard. You wouldn't want to, something like that, living next door
Well,
too.
actually, I've seen that at city council in the last couple of months.
Exactly. So it
people
just
doing that
depends
kind
on
of
the local laws.
Kind of business it is. Let's talk about every time there's a political race or political conversation, it always comes up invariably about small business and money. What small businesses need is access to capital. The Small Business Administration, I don't know really what they're doing these days. I've never tried to get it because I didn't want to. Somebody once said, if the elephant gets his nose under your tent, then the rest of them is attached to it. So I never tried to get a small business loan. But what's the best way to go about trying to get a small business loan? Or does it depend on the business?
All of the above. And when I say that, you're talking about Small Business Administration where they have flex loans, et cetera. Many of those loans are guaranteeing that in the case of default, that loan will be paid back. And they do have loans to where like a 7A or something like that, where they give you the loan themselves through just say Regions Bank or Max Bank or Navy Federal or something like that. But go directly to the bank yourself. And a lot of times we don't know what to ask for. When we go in directly and sit there with the loan officer, and that loan officer might give us an installment loan, just say $25,000, $30,000 or what have you, but you really need $130,000, $150,000, but you haven't asked for commercial lending. So then you go and do your research on what's available for commercial lending. Then you got to have past performer. They're not going to give you $100,000, $200,000 just because you have a great idea to go into business. You got to show a past performance history to show that, okay, I have done my due diligence and I am able to perform. And this is what I've generated over the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the case may be. And, a lot of places look for a pro forma. So when we go, we have to be prepared. We have expectations without having the experience. You could could have been a great worker somewhere or even had your business for a few years. But if your books are not right, nobody needs to or should give you anything. I wouldn't as a lender.
The 39th president of the United States, which he just passed, bless his soul, but he did leave us with a legacy of one department that's worth its weight in gold if we could get them to do what they are supposed to be doing. And that is the Community
Reinvestment Act.
The Community Reinvestment Act, which otherwise is known as CRA. Tell me a little bit about what the community reinvestment, or is it as it sounds?
It is as it sounds, but it's not always carried out in the same manner, just like almost everything else. It started in 1978, and the reason it came up is because of a lot of discrimination was going on, redlining and what have you. But the Community Reinvestment Act, in essence, basically says that those lending institutions, depository institutions in your community, are required by law with their net gross to reinvest that money back into the community up to 85% of that net gross. Well, they can do that in a number of ways. They could take, just say, for instance, 100 small businesses and take $1 million or $100 million and give each their equal amount, right? But then their default risk rate goes up as a result. Or they can take, just say, in the past, they had Mr. Calhoun and Mr. Seawright with Medical Place. They would give them the bulk of the money because they had a track record of being successful in the business, and they are more likely to pay to maintain their businesses. So then the default rate for that particular lending institution went way down as opposed to giving all of the money to multiple businesses. So there's a way to circumvent the law where the law says that you have to give back to the majority of the community. Well, like I just explained to you, they can do it in quantity with 100 businesses, or they can do it in smaller capacity with 2 businesses, and it's still a minority business being satisfied. So you have to be careful with that terminology, because nowadays, a lot of lending institutions are not in your community. A lot of them moved out, and guess what? If they're not in there, they're no longer required to give any money in those communities. So we hurt ourselves also. When I say we, I'm talking about in particular or specifically the Black community. We move out our own communities. So therefore, those banks are not required anymore for those communities. So you see a whole lot more dilapidation and devastation in Black communities that were once thriving communities because of the absence of lending institutions. And many of those institutions are only there for what, 2-3 days. When I say they're only there for 2-3 days, that's the first of the month, the third of the month, the sixth of the month, or whatever, because only thing that happens is that the monies are deposited for those who own fixed incomes or what have you. And then it's withdrawn on the same day, if not minutes after. So therefore, the bank doesn't get any benefit out of it except for the, the fee they may charge for, monthly or something like that.
So the poorer the neighborhood, a couple of weeks ago, Marcia Johnson, who's one of our city council people here, said in District 3, the average yearly income was $17,000 a year. Well, we're not going to get much happening over there with $17,000 a year as the average income.
That's correct. Well, if she says it's 17,000, I don't know why she said the average is 17,000. You have to ask her about her research, but I did this research for years, and I created a bank from scratch,
right?
Full service. And 2012. Well, what happens is if you say that the average income is 17,000 in District 3, how many residents do you have in District 3? And what residents do you have in District 3? You have low to moderate income wage earners in District 3. You have a lot of fixed income, Social Security and disability individuals in District 3. Then the rest of District 3 is pretty much commercial business.
Right.
Well, that was done with the downtown redevelopment back under Bobby Bright. It started, and Mayor Todd Strange completed that process. So it can't be left on Marche back, and it can't be left on Mayor Reed's back, because these are some things that took place prior to them. But when I say that, you're taking an average. The average means the low and the high. So if it's 17,000, as you stated, won't get too much.
And therefore, it eliminates the necessity of the CRA, because
yes, in some regards it does. However, it's not really residential. And I think that's what the current administration is trying to do with the city council and the mayor and the county commission. They're trying to develop residential properties with, the affordable housing and the apartment complexes that they're recreating. Because where there's no rooftops, there's no what?
There's no income.
No income or no need. You might have the businesses there, so that becomes a what? Industrial or commercial district as opposed to a residential district. Now look at the flip of that. District 5 and District 6. District 6 used to be the most affluent because it had the greatest wage earners and the most individuals with the higher levels of education. Well, what happened? The city moved further east. And when they moved further east, those individuals that were most affluent moved further east with the city moving farther east. So a lot of things are done by design. And a lot of times when you look at the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 25, the 40-year plan, Many of our sitting politicians don't go into the subtle nuances. They don't look far enough down the line. Yes, it sounds good on the front end, but on the back end, who really benefits from it most? We use the term economic development when we should be using the term economic advancement when we're talking about the people. Economic development means who's going to foot the bill for the cost of the project. But when we talk about economic advancement, we're talking about the people, the residents, the rooftops. Is it advantageous to have such and such development, but such and such development is not producing enough income, it's not producing enough jobs? Take the downtown redevelopment with Crampton Bowl. I had the argument on your show and on Mark Montiel and on Dan Mars on multiple occasions, which really brought Judge Mark Montiel and I together, and he started using some of my research and taking it to a higher level. What happened was it took $10,000 to develop the amphitheater on the riverfront, right? We made $6,000 in 2-3 years. I told him it would have taken us 150 years to get that $10 million back. Well, at that time, it cost $20 million with the Crampton Bowl complex, and we had made 100,000. And I said, well, it would take us 300 years. And that's how the former Councilman Willie Cook and I really became close. And we would go back and forth, he and I. Sometimes he'd bring Tommy Miller. So sometimes Tommy Miller, which was the appraiser, the county appraisal, we would go back and forth. And Thad McClammy, of course, with all of his economic development, Doc always had a plan, Gateway South, East and West or North. So we would go back and forth, and they would, bring the ideas, and then they know, okay, well, Bass is going to say yay or nay, and if so, we would just, bounce it off one another. But just because it says economic development, that created a lot of debt for the city. Almost $400 million at that time that we were making that argument when Willie Cook was running for mayor, and from 2009 to like 2015, which was the predecessor to me running for office in 2015 and again in 2019. Well, you can create the debt, but then the jobs was not there.
There's you just used it a few minutes ago. It is a two-word description that it reminds me of Sasquatch when I lived in Washington. We kept hearing about them, but we never saw them. Mm-hmm. And the word economic development has been, it's thrown around every election.
It's a political term.
Right. Because I think you just said something about a couple minutes ago. Why is it that the same places that looked poor before they got elected looked as poor after the election's over, and now they're up for re-election? What is economic development to you? Is that just moving a little bit or moving a lot?
Well, let me put it to you. It's a cycle. When I say it's a cycle, it's a generation, and a generation is 30 years, right? Everywhere we go, we start out from point A. And point A, after a period of 20 to 25 years, 30 years max, now they move that economic development to the other portion of the city, right? It takes also 20 to 30 years where there's been contamination for remediation. Say, for instance, the downtown redevelopment, the plume was there, right?
Okay.
So it sat vacant for almost 30 years, 28 years to be exact. Hobson Cox was downtown for the longest. I had a restaurant that I had taken over, Sugar Hill. And those buildings that became the Crest, H&L Green, and all of that stuff now that is booming downtown, those buildings were open for any of us to go and get, but we didn't do it. But there was a plume and whatever, so it sat vacant for 30 years. And those developers came in, some of the same people, I want to say that part, develop and redevelop every portion of the city. But you have to go with the people who had the capacity to do so, people who have the wherewithal, the means, and the resources to do so as well. But every 20 to 30 years, there's a shift into where that portion of the city that was booming, it starts to decay, and then they move on to the next. That's the only way you can have it, is as a cycle, right? But wherever the masses are, say, take this into consideration. The city demographics has changed tremendously since 2010, 2012 in that proximity, right? Mm-hmm. Well, why is it now that the vast majority of the city is considered to be denigrating as opposed to East Montgomery? Downtown redevelopment in East Montgomery. There's a lot of vacancies in East Montgomery right now. Remember what happened when Prattville, when Mayor Breyer took over? You know that I went to Mayor Breyer, I went to Gillespie, I went to the mayor Willis in Wetumpka. And I complained on your show and Mark Montiel's show. I said, hey, man, the city's got a clean bill of health from, I think it was Jackson Thornton at that time, were the city auditors or accountants. And they got a clean bill of health. I said, how can you have a clean bill of health when you got 37 to 44 vacant buildings in a new development? That was in December of 2010. And in 2011, in February, the city of Prattville was about to file bankruptcy.
Right.
And then they removed the mayor, or he resigned, and then he became the what? Lead or the head of what?
A DECA?
A DECA, which is what? Economic development, what?
Yeah, you tell me.
Yeah, but a DECA, Alabama
Yeah,
Economic
right.
Development Community
Action or
something to that effect. I forget the acronym. But anyway, and he run it for how long? For about 10, 12 years. If he's still not there, I think he's retired. But if that person had run the city into the ground, Prattville, and Gillespie took over, and he's done a very, very good job, in my opinion. But even Prattville have some of those issues. But the same thing happens over and over and over again. You just can't blame the politician, though. You got to blame the mindset of the people living in those cities. Where do we come in? Where's our business savvy individuals? We don't come together. We don't pool our resources. We wouldn't have to use the bank. We wouldn't have to use the government as much if we pooled our resources. Take, for instance, there are a lot of businesses that could unite themselves as opposed to having 500 barbershops. Cut it down to 150. Everybody don't have to be the owner. They can be partners. You cut down your expenses. You cut down the fact that now real estate is now open for other types of businesses. And I think that's what the city council is trying to do. I think that's what the county commission is trying to do with their moratoriums on how many businesses or whatever can be acquired in the city. But might be a little too late. So, and then we have the same individuals that own all of the real estate. Well, what does it harm you, Kevin, if you live in Auburn or you live in Pike Road and your properties in Montgomery? You don't have to pay any property tax, using that as an example, and you don't owe any debt on your property because you've owned your property 20 years or whatever, so you've paid those loans off. So it's sit vacant. It's still on your books as an asset, so if you want to go and borrow against it, you can. So you're not hurt by not having it occupied. So you can still have your rent increases using that double net or triple net, and that's what's happening to us. Well, why don't we start developing some? Nobody's stopping black folks from getting together and say, well, we can build a plaza, a shopping center ourselves. Look at what happened to Montgomery Mall. Look at what's happening to Eastdale Mall. Well, why can't we just go ahead and buy it out? Why do foreigners have to come in and buy it out?
And you're getting to my next question. There are people who are taught to be workers, and then there are people that are taught to be managers. I'm almost willing to say that our schools and our young black people are taught more or less to be workers as opposed to managers. The people on the football field who run up and down the field, they make a lot of money to the public, but at the end of the day, I've never seen a business that paid its employees more than they were making. So it's our school system from an economic standpoint messing up. We're not trying to grab out of these young folks the potential that they have rather than saying, well, okay, McDonald's is down the road.
Let me say this. How many of those school teachers have been business owners? So you can only teach your experience, right? So their syllabus says they can only teach such and such and such. The curriculum is set by the state. And the state does not say teach business. The state says teach liberal arts. The state says teach, acting, so to speak. And then they give you the basics on your math and what have you, your sciences, what have you. So that curriculum is not set up for a business. That's more vocational, say, for instance, for plumbers or something like that, or mechanics, or used to be brick masons, whatever. Well, as you can see, that has been reduced to almost non-existence. So how many young black men are brick masons or carpenters or
you don't see many now. You don't see many.
That has been taken away. So then we started to pursuing the suit and tie, go and make the minimum wage in the office. But then everybody else started doing the vocations. And then what happens? Now we have to go to work for everybody else doing what we were doing from the beginning. And they're the millionaires. They're the billionaires. They're the ones with the government contracts.
I heard somebody once say that each group of people, whether it's the guy at the banana factory, the guy who makes cars, or the guy who makes peanuts, need to have the foresight to look out for their own interests.
In economics,
In
there's
economics.
something called Pareto optimality. And I learned this early on as a student of economics. And what that Latin phrase means, no one group can get ahead without harming another. No one group can get ahead without harming another. But why is it that almost always it's the same group that's the footstool? Remember, you and I have sat in several meetings and we've heard the following phrase or the following statement from non-black participants in those meetings, right? They say everything that goes on in your city where you have a predominantly black populace and or politicians, we can't do anything unless your black politicians sign off on it. Or your black elite sign off on it. So we often shift the blame or displace blame in the wrong place or the wrong direction when we should have to start with ourselves, like you said. If we had the foresight or the wherewithal to say, okay, well, wait a minute, I need to do this now so that we can have future, higher percentages in contracts or what have you. Well, why is it that the same people always get these contracts? When let me digress here. Government contracts. In 2012, that's when myself and others, we got the bank approved, right? In 2012, I was also party to a 3-man group who won the Redstone Arsenal contract in Huntsville, $282 million. 3 of us. We beat out a $13 billion company, or $9 billion company who had the contract for the previous 13 years. The question became, well, who are these 3? How did they do that? We didn't have a whole lot in assets. Combined together, we didn't have $1.5 million, $2 million. We needed $5 million to do payroll every 2 weeks. We went to Miami, we went to New York, we went to Atlanta. We talked to some Oprah Winfrey people. We talked to Magic Johnson people. We talked to, I forget the guy over in Atlanta. We went to all of the top banks in the state of Alabama, and what they told us, come back and see us in 6 months. Well, how in the hell I'm going to come back and see you in 6 months when I need the money right now? We beat out that company from the proposal. I was brought on to do the financial piece. I was not an owner in the business, but they brought me on to do the financial piece. If we could have gotten that payroll in year 1, I would have made $4.4 million myself just from doing the HR side for being a part of that winning team. Well, we got some flashback from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama had the contract for the previous 13 years, and I'm Rodney Brooks. I wouldn't want to give it up either. So what I did or managed to do, I was also a United Healthcare producing agent. I made contact with them and got the information, and then made contact with some of the current employees and got the information and put together the financial piece, because that's proprietary information. So if I'm Blue Cross Blue Shield, I wouldn't have given it up either. But because we did not have the resources to get that portion of the money starting June 1st of 2012, the contract was awarded to us on May 3rd, I think, of 2012. Later that month of June, the 1st of July, the federal government did what? Furloughed. Shut down until, I think, October. Hell, we'd have been, the whole $60 million that we would have gotten for year 1 of the contract would have gone away in payroll, and we would not have been able to do any work. And then when we met with what was called venture capitalists or angels, hell, they wanted 60 to 65% of the gross. Or should I say net gross from us? No, that meant we would have been working for them. No.
How do we change? How do we change some of the paradigm here? How do we change? Because we talk about this all the time, but it doesn't really change. If you had the magic wand, how would we change this so some of these people could get access to the American dream or the American nightmare, whichever one you want to call it? How do we change this?
Well, I'm going to say this on purpose this way. This is the America with the American dream, because everybody that comes here have a dream of coming here and doing well. Majority of the people that come here does well, but majority of the people that come here, where do they set up shop?
Yeah, we know.
So then, if we know that everybody else that comes here set up shop in the black community, and the black community should unify themselves, even though we're gonna always have our differences, but we should have collective and cooperative economics amongst ourselves first and foremost, and everybody else has a trade surplus as opposed to us having a trade deficit all of the time. Well, you only trade your surplus. We could do for ourselves what everybody else is doing for us.
Stop right there. Why is it that when black folks say we want to do for ourselves, all of a sudden we are said to be discriminatory, we are said to be whatever. But when Chinese come over here, and they hire Chinese, which I ain't got no problem with that. You got to look out after yourself. My Hispanic friends come over, they hire Hispanic friends. That's cool. But why is it that they come to the black communities, but black communities economically don't really do better?
Because they're being mined, everything is being extracted from. But you can't blame them from going where the
And I
gold
don't,
is.
right.
We have to blame ourselves for not having set up the necessary equipment, the necessary education, the necessary funding, of which we have. We have all we need. We just don't practice group economics.
It is said that if we were a nation economically, we would be the fifth or the sixth largest economy in the world.
Certainly. Take Africa, for instance. Everybody goes to Africa and mine what Africa has, its minerals, its resources,
Right.
its gold, its diamonds, its oil, whatever, right? Likewise, here in America, everybody that relocate or locate here in America goes where? To the descendants from Africa community. We have to change our own mindset and paradigm before
Can we?
make some. Absolutely, we can.
But we haven't done it. We haven't done it yet.
That's the magic wand. But you have to sometimes have the winds of change to whip on us like in a storm or blizzard. And what I mean by that, a recession is a depression for us. A depression is great anxiety for us. When the government shuts down and just say checks are not sent out, what happens then? The very same people get very, very antsy then, and they will rebel against their government when you should have been rebelling against your government prior to. And maybe you wouldn't have to rely so much on your government if we did that with ourselves. Prior to the civil rights movement, were we not reliant upon ourselves?
Yes, yeah. Let me ask you a question though. In your mind, you're from Montgomery, Alabama. So in your mind, is this about color or culture?
You have to connect the two and make the two one and the same. You cannot say culture without having a definitive statement, caveat. When you say culture, gang banging, is that a black thing?
No, it was started.
Okay, then.
Started by Al Capone and all them.
Well, that's what you say.
Yeah.
But it was different ethnic groups, right?
Right.
Well, murderers. Is that a cultural thing? Is that a racial thing?
It is when the people.
Wait. Answer the question. The question is,
Well,
is that race? Because black folks are killing black folks, white folks are killing white folks, Mexicans are killing Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So in your community
okay.
is where you have your adversity and you deal with each other accordingly. Here in Montgomery, they just passed some law, trying to pass some law to where the Hispanic community could govern themselves.
Yeah.
The Native Americans have already been governing themselves. In 2014, I sat at the table with the previous district attorney and the current district attorney and now Sheriff Cunningham, and they gave the rights to the Arabs and the Indians, when I say Indian, Far East Indians, the right to protect themselves because they were getting what? Robbed. Because they, at that time, the banks were saying that they could not put their money in the banks because of the Patriot Act, the Terrorist Act, and all of this stuff because of money laundering, and they were providing money for terrorists or what have you. So they were keeping their monies in their homes and the cars and the business. So even some police were arrested for robbing and other crimes against these people.
True.
So
true.
You don't think Koreans have vicious attacks on one another with fighting and what have you?
Sure, sure.
How many of them are sitting in our city or county jails? What about the Arabs or Indians? We see them, those of us that know some personally, they fight.
Yeah.
There's domestic violence, but they're not in the jail cells. Why? Because they have the right to do what? Control and what? Chastise their own. Whereas if it's black and white, you go down to the city and the county, it's full. If you look up the mug shots today and from the last month, you'll see a lot of white and you see a lot of black, but you won't see a whole lot of others. It's not like they're better than we are. It's not like they handle their situations any better. They just keep it internal.
Well, listen, we've got to have you back because this is just part one.
Certainly.
And we are actually going to we're going to talk a little bit more about this because it seems that the answers are in front of us. We just have a hard time. I asked a question one time. I said, it is not the answer that we fear. It is who is going to ask the question.
Let me put it to you this way. Everything is mathematical. You have a quadratic equation. It's going to have a plus or minus sign in the portion that's on the left side of the equal sign, right? But the equal sign is also going to have its answer, right? So the answer is always in the problem. You can't solve for one side without dividing it by the other side in order to get the answer because it says equal to. The problem always has the answer. One variable is already going to be given, stated that, okay, well, X is so-and-so, Y is so-and-so. Now it says equal so-and-so. Well, the equal sign means that they're what? The same. So how do we solve for X? Or how do we solve for Y? Well, we got to know about one variable, and that one variable, okay, we got to know what the problem is. We know that we have a shortage of capital, right? Well, we can go to the bank, we can borrow from here or there and what have you. Well, what about collective or group economics? Everybody else uses it.
Everybody.
Except.
You know. You know.
So we can't shift or displace blame on no one else before we have a self-assessment.
If you could if you could give some advice right now that everybody would listen to, tell me what that advice would be.
Accept your own and be yourself. Love yourself more than you love anybody else. And then you'll start doing for self what you should have been doing from the beginning. And that will carry over to you being able to aid or help or assist others. And as a result of being able to help yourself, now you may have a surplus to where you could give to others.
Right.
So, yes, sir.
I wanted to ask one question before we go. If you could give some advice to 15, 16-year-olds about saving money and not falling into consumerism, what would you say in a very, youth-oriented way? Because I have a 15-year-old. He likes nice things. He stays with his mom a good bit of the time in Kennesaw, Georgia, and it's quite bougie up there.
I'm familiar with it.
Are you?
Yes.
And I just wanted to hear your advice on that.
Haven't had.
To younger people specifically about saving money
Okay.
and how much they should maybe save out of their paycheck and things like that. I took over.
No problem. And advice is the most expensive thing in the world. And when I say that, I mean this. I have 3 adult children as well. But I'm going to give some advice that was given to me at around the same age, 14, 15 years old. Billy Whitehurst, Bernard Whitehurst's brother. I worked for him from age 12 to 14 pumping gas. And I used to hear him talk about business all the time. I thought everybody that was in business was rich. And I left from there and I went to the store called Family Bargain Center, which was next door to Big B on Fairview. And I became the stock manager and I was the cashier and what have you. I went from making $25, $30 a week to making $110 a week, which was equal to what my father was making at that time at minimum wage. And I was making as much or more at 14, 15 years old. But the advice that Mr. Whitehurst gave to me, never spend more than you have. Don't be long-eyed. Don't be long-eyed. What do you mean long-eyed? Vanity. it says that whenever you go into a store, they're gonna always put something in front of you to make you want to buy that item, even though you didn't come into the store.
Like
for
candy
that.
bars.
Anything, everything. So, vanity. Everybody's in the business of selling something. That doesn't mean you have to be a buyer. You have to maintain control. You asked specifically about what percentage. Most experts will tell you 20 to 25%
Uh,
your gross.
so of your, let's say you work at McDonald's,
Mhm.
you get $250 a week.
Mhm.
What should you say versus what should you just splurge on
And you're living at home.
and live at home?
If you got $250 a week, that's after tax. So that $250 I'll put away $150. You always live beneath your means.
But then that teenager might say, "Well, I don't want to do that. I want to go buy the new AirPods or AirPods." So how do you establish?
You can buy that after you save X dollars. You can't buy it today. Say for instance, you say, well, you got to save $1,000 before you can spend $250. So it would take them a whole month.
Gotcha.
Okay. Tell folks how they can reach you, and they want to have more of this conversation. And again, we are going to podcast this later on, but tell folks how they can reach you.
Well, my office of American Financial Services, Thomas Bass or Thomas Muhammad on Facebook, but 5295 Vaughn Road, or you can reach me at my office number 334-260-0774, and that will carry over to my cell phone.
Okay. And we are going to try to have Mr. Muhammad on as often as possible, just because money is the one thing that no matter how old you are, no matter how young you are, we know what it is. We may not know the power of it.
Let me give this disclaimer
Right.
because it's such a litigious environment.
Right.
With the Alabama Secretary Security and Exchange Commission and the different licensing agencies that I'm with, state banking and what have you,
Right.
IRS, you have to give the disclaimer that this is not professional advice. This is personal advice that is being given on this show or podcast today. Professional advice is paid for advice when you come into the office.
That's right. So the views and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of
The participants of this
the
podcast.
participants of this podcast, but merely information given out for general cause and general use.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for coming in, and we're going to have many more of these conversations.